What's up, everybody? Welcome to Podcast Now. I'm Alex, and in this video, I want to talk about when it's realistic to expect DLC for Hogwarts Legacy. Now, that is, of course, assuming that we get DLC. There's, of course, the back and forth of, should we, shouldn't we, or will we, won't we? I think it's somewhat likely. I'm sure they see the numbers, the upper elites at Warner Bros., going to Avalanche and saying, look, you did incredible. The game sold incredible. But we're going to need something to tide people over until you can also give us Hogwarts Legacy 2. So why don't you make a DLC first? But for the sake of the argument for this video, let's take that out. Let's take that argument out and say, okay, let's say we're going to get DLC. When would we get DLC? Well, the first thing to note is that the game isn't out on all the platforms that it's going to be out on, right? And that's a very easy observation, a casual observation. So it comes out still on the last gen consoles, PS4, Xbox One, and such, just in about a month or so, right? Early May. And then late July, you get it on the Switch. Now, we've been saying for a long time, myself as well as other Hogwarts Legacy creators, I wouldn't expect DLC until it releases on all these systems. And I think that's a very common, number one, opinion. I think that's a very common practice from game developers. You would not, and I also just don't think it's actually possible for them to have DLC done so quickly, but there's no way you would do DLC, say, like in June, before the game has even come out on Switch. So the game isn't even out yet, and then the base people get it, get DLC, and the Switch people still have to wait for the base game. That just would be incredibly unfair. And then honestly, again, I take one more step to say, I just don't think it would be done. Even if it's something that they could tolerate, their morals could accept, I just don't think it would ever happen, because I just don't think that's how game development works. So what I'd be looking at is roughly a year. I know that's, for those that maybe this is the first time they're hearing it, that may come as a shock. I think you're looking at about a year after the base game is out, which by that, I guess I mean the PS5 and Series S and X version. So I'm talking like February to February. I think somewhere in that 9 to 12, maybe even like a 9 to 15 month range makes a lot of sense for DLC. And here's why. We've talked about DLC, the different possibilities, but no matter what you do, it's going to be some sort of undertaking. There's a multiplayer option, which no matter which option you choose in that, it's still multiplayer. So you have to build a whole multiplayer kind of network, right? That does not take a month or two. That takes a long time. If you wanted just a simple story expansion, right, which I think is the most likely, right? You got like Quidditch, you got dueling. There's all sorts of suggestions for what they could do. I think the most simplistic and the most natural would be just give us a 5-hour, main story, give us a couple side missions, maybe have a new character involved, it takes place over the summer, when the game ends, let's say, right? That seems the most probable, and that does not take a few months. It used to take a few months, right? Go back like 10 years ago, go back maybe even 5, 6, 7 years ago, maybe you could get it in half a year, right? Maybe that's the average, but right now, with the way game development is, and also you have to think about how they would split up their team, right? Who works on this DLC while the other part of the team works on the next game. It takes a long time. I honestly look, and I think there's no better example, at least current example, one that's just right in front of our faces, as Horizon. So Horizon Forbidden West came out last February, end of last February, and then the Burning Shores DLC comes out this April. So that was actually 14 months. And this is a huge studio of Guerrilla Games, right? To work on DLC for that game. Big open world, right? A game that's 20, 30, 40, 50 hours, depending on what you do, how long you take. And then to make a DLC that's probably a 10, 15-hour experience in this Burning Shores DLC took him about a year and 2 months. So again, is that the be-all, end-all? No. But I do think you can look around for other examples if you want to. The average nowadays is closer, I think, to a year than if you go back, years from now. You could get a DLC 3, 4, 5 months after the game comes out. That did happen. That happened all the time. Nowadays, that just doesn't happen. So I would be looking at like next February. I know that's a long time. That's a lot of time for the game to kind of completely fall off. But to be honest, and that does go into like the player-based thing. Look, at the end of the day, a lot of these single-player games, they all do this, right? Any game that's a single player, whether it's an open-world single player or, linear, any game that's like that is going to have the most players playing it at the beginning. People are going to buy it throughout time, and as Hogwarts goes on different consoles, people will buy it, and it just stops. Like, that's literally how it works. There's nothing to keep it going, and honestly, the game doesn't need to keep going. This is not a live service game. The game doesn't need 500,000 players 8 months after it releases. There's no there's no need for that. The game's not designed for that. So I know it may look bad, and the news sites and all that stuff may report on, oh, the game's player base is dropping. Well, what would bring them back? It would be DLC. But number one, you don't rush that kind of stuff. And number two, it's perfectly in the norm for games like this to completely drop off. So you're looking at next January, next February, the game may have next to no players, right? Next to no players playing it concurrently. DLC comes out, all of a sudden, not everybody comes back. 20, 30, 40% of the people come back for the DLC. That's how it works. So I do expect something like that could happen. I don't think they're going to be rushed into it because they're saying, oh my God, the sky's falling. Nobody's playing the game anymore. They've made their billions of dollars, okay? They can take a break, take a step back and say, we'll work on the DLC. It's going to take a year. We don't really care if the player base falls off a cliff because it's going to do that anyway. So that's kind of the timeline that I would say. I wouldn't be surprised if next year around this time we got DLC. Now, what that could mean, though, if you want to play it almost in reverse or take that moment and go backwards, could we get an announcement in a few months? I think it's possible. I think with the Switch release, or right after the Switch release, right? So you're looking at late July, early August, or August, September, right? You're going into the fall. I think it is possible, and if there is DLC, it would be likely that they would announce it. They would say, hey, we're working on DLC. Whether it's a blog post or some thank you letter, I think they could announce it. And then as you get closer, right, October, November, December, maybe you start showing some stuff. Now, it's not, you don't normally show too much for DLC. It's not like the lead up that we had for Hogwarts. You show very little, the thing comes out. That's the timeline I would say we're looking at if we actually get DLC. If we don't get DLC, we'll obviously throw this video in the garbage, okay? Let me know what you all think. Make sure you're subscribed, bell icon turned on. If you want to check out any of my other YouTube channels or my other social media, all the links are in the description. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all on the next one.